Hello, everyone. So first things first, the way I'm going to be formatting our presentation is it's somewhat ironic, going from most advanced of where we talk with our clients right now about trends and kind of what's important to Frontier when it revolves around integrated fundraising. And then as the final half of the presentation is a little bit more covering the basics of what are we talking about here as the core building blocks of integrated fundraising. Toby and Sam, feel free to interject if there's a key question along the way. I will start us along. So just a little about Frontier. There's plenty of agencies. There's plenty of ways to fundraise. And one of the things is I love this quote: as to methods, there may be a million and then some, but principles are few. The one who grasps principles and successfully selects his own methods is the one who we're going to be talking about. And so just if we think about our team, any agency that you outsource to, it's a team of awesome professionals that are writers, designers, coders. We're a very data-driven team, as you can see here, where we report back to our clients. We use these slides to say, hey, here's how long the average team member has been. This is what our retention is. When we talk about online, we focus on that there is these cohorts that we have of our clients. You can see that not all are the same size. So particularly when we talk about integrated fundraising, is it really matters what size you are, but a lot of the principles remain the same. One thing we'll talk about is match campaigns, the sort of overall size. Remember, we're Canadians, so market size really matters here. We oversaw fundraising for about 19 clients, raising just shy of 15 million. And December 31st, big day of the year. One trend we wanted to point out is email to web and web to total annual giving. So first things first, direct email revenue for our clients was 23% of their overall web revenue. And then web revenue as a percent of all annual giving was on average 28%. That did vary some, but it was overall quite consistent. Some stats for everyone here is we saw that the average gift in 2020 from email campaigns was $157. The average response rate in 2020 from email campaigns was 0.62%. And so there's a reason why you send more than one email when you're having a campaign. And for those who added an email address to their contact file in 2020, it seemed on average they'd raise $15. So if you're trying to think about what is the value of doing a campaign just to add emails, it's because you should be expecting that when you send your cultivation emails that you're raising more money. We're going to talk about print response rates. So we want to remember that 0.62% right now. We're going to kind of move forward, talk a little bit about acquisition. So Frontier's focus on acquisition is for organizations that have what I would describe as an encatchment area. So an urban poverty relief organization or a hospital foundation that says, hey, we're in your neighborhood and we're serving these neighbors in need. We would do postal walks, so we don't have to address to donors the mailings. If you have a local newspaper, a freestanding insert or FSI is something that we've been using for quite some time, partly because they're quite cheap to produce. And in our world, we refer to deep lapse mailers as a form of acquisition. So if someone hasn't given in a few years, a lot of the principles are the same as if they haven't given. And we've noticed that as well with their ability to continue again being donors. And so lastly is we have a rented list program we call ACPAC, where we're making sure that we're speaking, if available, we have that donor, the list's name. And my principle there is they don't know us, but at least we know them. One stat that I would, and so there's going to be a couple statistics that I think are quite important for anyone doing integrated fundraising. And one principle that I think is very important is separating your cultivation of existing donors budget from your acquisition budget. And so any organization that wants to grow has to be investing in acquisition. What this tells you here is our clients, if they spent money on acquisition, on average, it costs them $13 to receive a new donor. And so if you're thinking, let's use just a different number. Say it costs $25. What they might have done is had a cost per acquisition of $100, but that average donor gift was $75. And they're thinking, I'm not reliant on that donor's first gift. I'm using that donor's first gift as part of the net acquisition costs. One of the things that was unprecedented for us about 2020 was that our donors, our clients had a profitable year, essentially on acquisition. It wasn't without precedence. It might have been a Canadian thing. A lot of our clients had positive net income instead of net investment on acquisition in 2017. But I do think it's very important to think about attaching that kind of cost to acquire with the first gift to understand what is that true investment. So here we're looking at print appeals and cultivation revenue. So you'll notice a lower average gift among our clients for print than digital, and then a much higher response rate. And then for every dollar that was spent on cultivation for our clients, they made $8.83 on average. So we have that about kind of 19 clients that we draw from for these averages. And so two things that I wanted to note when we talk about print and digital is, why is there a digital gift, higher average gift for digital? And my explanation for that is you're really thinking about the medium that someone's giving as credit card only versus credit card and check. So there tends to be a lesser range in credit card gifts because I'm giving what I want to in this moment, right? Like we've all bought stuff with our credit card that we couldn't afford, but with the checking account, you do have to give what's in your checking balance. There tends to be higher amounts that are given by a check because I could write $100,000 check and I'm not at all thinking about your processing costs. And kind of one thing as we kind of move forward when we talk about average response rate is I have this sort of kind of general heuristic of like what happens in 10 minutes in mail takes 10 emails, and not to be so exact, but one of the things that is a good 1.5 page letter or a newsletter is often communicated quite differently in email. And so if you think about hey, I've got news coming, it's one day until our Kila webinar. Hey, it's in 1 hour. Here's the follow-up from our Kila webinar. Just a reminder, here's the next opportunity. There's smaller chunks spread out over time. So that much lower response rate implies that you need to be thinking of it as more of a story arc over multiple emails. So just to kind of round things up, important to remember that the average investment to acquire a new donor, and then the average net income for clients spent on cultivation. So thinking of it in this more organizational financial state will help. Some key performance indicators that I think are very important for any organization doing marketing is understanding the overall multi-year arc of where it's going. So I love this quote: if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Cheshire Cut, so they don't have to be the most serious professional quotes ever. We don't need to look at this chart or the kind of placeholder text I had, but one of the things I wanted to highlight is this is sort of the fundraiser's curse, is we often get given goals and they say, hey, okay, we were just shy of 600,000 last year. I expect over 600,000 this year. And then the year ends, did you do it? Yep, okay, well, more next year. And if you didn't, okay, well, you failed. So this is what is called a lagging indicator. It happens after. You don't know necessarily where you're going. And so we would prefer to have indicators that are leading and equipping ideally for a fundraiser. So one way that we visualize how to grow is a very basic one here. Are you growing? Do you have more first-time and reactivated donors than donors that had lapsed? So brand new, people who haven't given in a recent year, and then compare against people who gave in 2019 but didn't give in 2020. So a very basic principle of growth is you should have more in than out, and just kind of making sure that you're putting these stats together. What I would describe as one of the most important fundraising tasks, because it involves pretty much anyone in your organization, is second gift conversion. And so we see roughly, if someone is going to ever give 2 gifts to your organization, odds are 80% of your people who do that do it in the first year. So one of the things to think about is like 20% of the people who give a second gift tend to do it in year 2, 3, 4, or 5. So this sort of principle here is being focused on that first year and ensuring that someone is thanked quickly and that there's an opportunity to continue their journey as a donor. We also track their 3rd gift conversion and their 4th gift conversion. And so this is one of the key metrics of a fundraising organization that understands how to thank their donors, and kind of follow up with that new opportunity to really truly become a donor. And then why do we do what we do is the long-term donor value. Again, you can see some analysis that we gave for another client there. What long-term donor value is, and in our calculation, is what is the sum of 5 years worth of giving from a certain cohort. So those who gave in 2015 as their first gift, we would follow 5 years of giving. We would see, thanks to second gift conversion, that most of them stop, but those that keep going keep giving. And then we go back in time and we say, well, what was that worth for us? You can see that at Frontier, we kind of enable our clients with a little bit of a prediction based on their past year's giving history of saying, hey, this 2017 cohort still has 1 more year to give, and this is how much we think it would be. We have a whole bunch of other stats, but we're not doing that right now. But point being is to have a data-driven approach is actually to lean back, not lean into certain results. So instead of overanalyzing an appeal or a donor, we want to go way back and say, well, where are the trends telling us from a multi-year arc? And as we start to kind of zoom in here, I wanted to talk about trends, because people love to say, like, what's next, Ben? Like, where is fundraising going? And it's like, part of my last decade has been learning the last 30 years of print fundraising and making sure that we're doing all of those best practices now. And then with email, I started doing email fundraising 2009, and we're continuing to optimize it. And so we'll probably have more of a Midwest like group here, but our US group here. So using kind of some Midwest language would be like, a lot of fundraising trends I see are like watching your dog run away in the prairies, which is to say, you're seeing it for a very long time. A lot of the trends I'd want to very briefly talk about these are core principles of a fundraising machine, which is, are you doing methods to make your donors more aware that you exist? Are you giving them opportunities to align their values and do an initial action with you? And we call those advocacy campaigns. Are you doing activities for acquisition and lapse reactivation to kind of get the growth going? And then doing the marketing work required for the ask to show impact and accountability, and then ultimately making sure someone in our world, the best donors are multi-year, multi-gift, or high value, and everyone's eligible for a legacy gift. So trend, oh, hey, wait, like, what about the latest social media, Ben? No, that's not something you need to be aware about. Sad news, if you're under age 54, you probably don't have that much wealth. The biggest trends that are happening thanks to COVID, and it began before, is that older citizens, and this is US data here, have more wealth than ever. And there's this trend here of baby boomers have continued to get wealthy, and as well as the silent generation, and Gen X and millennials have taken a step back. So we see, on the left chart here, viewed by generation, which is mine, millennials, we have a very, very small portion of overall wealth. And then furthermore, you can see that never before, really, aside from a small blip in the 2008 financial crisis, those under 40 are just holding a very small percentage of US wealth. So if we think about, like, hey, what are we doing and who are we talking to? It's just a reminder, it's going to even more so be those who are age 55 and older. So, and that's been, anyone learning fundraising knows that that's a typical donor. And if we're looking to find more money, it needs to be thinking from that group. We have in Canada a national change of address, but the bigger, so if you're seeing what NCOA is there, the bigger point is everyone knows someone who's moving. If you're thinking about doing your donor communication, remembering that increasing your touch points is another way to be top of mind when someone is thinking about moving addresses. That'll be a big trend of ours over the next decade as we have this ability to work from wherever we are. Galas, this is a gala from Australia. We have an Australian on our team, so I thought it'd be funny. So many agencies are forecasting that events will never return to their pre-pandemic peak. So what are you doing if there's no 2021 or 2020 event and there's no festival season? This is an opportunity to adapt. And so one thing the Frontier team did for our staff party is we had this remote event where these two real people that we know in our community in Victoria here, they hosted a trivia night for us. And we were all in our homes, but we felt we were more connected. So this always, anytime there's a downturn, there's an opportunity for engagement. And one amazing opportunity in my mind is sending videos. So again, if you're like, hey, I've had an iPhone for a while, how is videos a trend? Exactly. It just takes us a very long time as charities to get to these trends. And so one thing that the Frontier team did, Nick, our creative director, had been around for 6 years, and we got we got Canadian star Colin Macri to do a personalized video through Cameo for him, and he had a little laugh cry. We really enjoyed it. You can do the equivalent either through kind of the people most famous in your network, or even just literal, find that B-list celebrity that wants to be doing thank you videos for you. And kind of in the world of Seth Godin, and marketer that we should all know, this is a purple cow. It will surprise and delight people to have a quick little video to say like, hey, Sam, like you gave a gift. I just wanted to say thanks on behalf of the people here. Year end. Giving Tuesday, it's been different times of year. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think if we take the principles of it, yes, match campaigns are great. But if we are too literal and say we need to have this sacred Giving Tuesday, then you're missing the point. One thing we noticed was, again, year end every year has been our biggest day of the year, even with a big Giving Tuesday in 2020. But we noticed in particular, international development organizations raise way more on that final day of the year. So if you have a lot of donors that have higher net worth, that last day of the year is that final punch, almost no matter what you do. Match campaigns. So one strategy that we'd want to briefly talk about is having your organization do an annual match campaign. As we kind of show here, we do it for a number of organizations, and starting to record how each organization's match revenue is doing relative to the whole. And we can see there's an opportunity here to think about how you can engage major donors, as well as this sort of post-pandemic world where you might have more donors with less to give. So if you say that, take your web revenue for the year, assume that maybe the 10% of your web revenue is the goal, and try and find both that major donor and send out emails talking about that campaign. Just kind of going to go quickly here. Monthly giving continues to be a trend. So if you haven't prioritized that, we'd suggest doing a sub-brand and making sure there's more opportunities to give so that your charity can be the Disney Plus of giving. Trend here is this is a K-shaped economy, which means there's more people with less, and then there's other people with significantly more. One thing that we've been trying to do is more mid-level communication, both in email and print. So that could be a special mailer, a cover letter on newsletters, And we'll talk about broadcast voice messaging, but and also an opportunity to engage a different point of view, and the overall purpose of it being this more white glove service. And then lapsed donors, one of the things that one of our partners, Care2, suggests is doing surveying to those who have become inactive. So if you send an email survey to people who haven't given in a few years, one thing that they noted is inactive subscribers were nearly 200% more likely to become active on email again. And particularly these lapsed donors were over 250% more likely to make another donation. And the point of a survey isn't the data itself. It is to say like, hey, you know, I see it, you're done, but do you still love puppies and kitties? Like, do you know, where does your passion lie? Something that we've recently started doing is leaving voicemails, or they're called broadcast voice messaging, with donors. In Canada, we're not allowed to ask for money, but we are allowed to just say thank you and give an update. And when we do it prior to a campaign, it has had enormous responses. One of our clients, Wildlife Rescue Association, had an increase from 5% response rate to nearly 10%. And the only difference was those donors who got the test were basically thanked and given a small update. And it's a 60-second message. So another thing to think about with integrated marketing is making sure you're doing all best practices well. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for us, making sure that you're using more variable copy and email. We can, if I'll be skipping through some slides, but I wanted to make sure that you had a copy of slides. So if you wanted to know more about our rented list, you could do that. We've studied our advocacy platform, and we can see that if you use Care2 in particular, there's others, but it costs a few dollars per name to get someone on an email address. Our clients have gotten 35 emails added to their lists, and we've been able to study the response rate and average gift, and it's on par with some of the best campaigns we've ever done to acquire new donors, at just over 1.65% here. Facebook advertising. This is a visual we've done following the next after model of doing donor acquisition funnels. And so the overall principle here is to make sure that if you're doing Facebook advertising, that there's a landing page that they go to that ideally offers a something of value, to be like, hey, give us your email address and we'll give you a recipe card. I think the overall principle, it doesn't really matter what it is, but that is an opportunity to test. But instead of your primary advertising campaigns trying to just be fundraising focused, the goal here should be email acquisition focused. And then when they do that, saying, okay, now would you like to give a gift? And the stats here is that 1.5% will likely give that gift post sign up, and then another 1.5% are going to be giving their first gift in 12 months. Whereas frontier testing, I highly, and we're going to get into, highly recommend Copy Optimizers, something to kind of Google and we'll talk about. But in our world, the use of windowed versus non-windowed envelopes. And there's an overall trend to use longer and more plain emails and to give it a more genuine feel. And it's about the landing page, not necessarily about the subject line. So kind of having gone through so here's Frontier, kind of here are the trends that we're seeing and what's important to us from a data perspective. One of the things I kind of wanted us to finish on is what are these building blocks that we've been talking about, and why is it so important? So I wanted to say here a great quote: concentration builds wealth, diversification preserves it. So you might have a strong email program or mail program or something else. The point should be to start to move into other areas so a single channel isn't your entire source of strength anymore. And it might not be as productive as the first thing that you did. But if all of your fundraising is email and then a major change happened, you've cut off your entire pipeline. And so anyone who follows a principle like this of kind of, hey, where did you get your money? Well, now you need to move it into something more conservative. And as fundraisers, we need to think similarly. So here's a fun visual, integrated fundraising at work. Basically, we're trying to say multi-medium. And more importantly, thinking of the donor as a human and not as a web donor or a print donor or a major donor, a middle donor. They're just a donor. And we want to take into account every interaction, and then understanding that by having that increased engagement, we're improving our brand recognition and overall fundraising results. So the more cohesive this experience is, the overall better one it is. Now, their principle is recognizing it's a relationship. So the more communication, good communication donors receive, the more engaged they will be and closer they will feel to the organization. And so what we want you to be doing is providing chances to get involved. Like, I can't give if you're not asking. And then for you to be celebrating success, showing accountability, demonstrating impact. And the idea is like provide intrigue and joy, like remembering that you're a value add in their life, and just lead the donor through this ideal experience. And ask and thank. Something that we think when you do your print fundraising is how can you connect it to your mission? This is an example here, the Dandelion Society in Victoria, very boots on the ground, handing out coffee to people he's serving. And so we thought, hey, what about a coffee sleeve? And like, who among us isn't drinking coffee right now? And the ideal is like this premium that someone is receiving in the mail is connected to the overall mission of the organization. And it's a very human experience as well. Something we've done for another organization is working in sort of like bookmarks, where again, that it can be top of mind at other times. We've done Christmas ornaments. These are a little bit more expensive, but they're shown to do well in terms of getting someone to be more likely to respond. And digitizing the same experience. So there was a placemat that we would send to donors in the mail, and there's an opportunity to say, hey, you've given a gift. Now write an encouraging message that will be at our Easter meal. Online advertising in general, thinking about how can that be very similar to what a donor is receiving elsewhere. I would view advertising as a complementary activity. And so I'm going to finish with some 3 basic principles with some value add details. We're going to skip through a couple things again, but the point is we'd want you to have the good slide. So why we want good photography as part of integrated marketing: sparking emotion, fostering trust, and creating that connection. And that is much quicker to process imagery than the words. And we want it to either, we would be authentic to who you are, highest quality possible, show faces, show eye contact, and we look where they look. So the one difference might be on a donor form, looking at the form itself versus directly at the donor. 1 or 2 people, so it's not a whole crowd. And it's okay to do multiple shots of the same person. Good photography showing diversity and inclusiveness. There's opportunity to be challenging stereotypes, challenging the sad versus hopeful imagery. I encourage everyone to show who they serve, and take a step back and see how your imagery is being an opportunity for hope for your organization. And they're just like, there's the humanity here of seeing people that I as a donor might be connected to that I otherwise wouldn't through the organization. And if you can kind of notice here that when one mentioned the rule of thirds is it's okay to use other space around the person. Typical charity is just like this totally zoomed in photo, and candid. You can see here that it's just this opportunity to capture a moment that the donor can now be a part of. Accessibility. I'm going to blur through this one, ironically. As a colorblind guy, I want to make sure that you all know that contrast is super important. If you want me to help you, I need to be able to see what you're saying. And if the average donor is over 50 years old, we have to think about the fact that the majority of people with vision impairment are over the age of 50. So my way of thinking about it, so we say average text type should be 16 to 18 point minimum. Be very thoughtful about button size and spacing. And one way that if you're very, that I do is I take off my glasses and I operate the website. And if it's intuitive for me without my glasses on, it should be a good donor experience. So using shapes and colors to dictate things, and making sure that you have button consistency. Using the same color each time for your giving button is quite important. You can see here is an example of too much choice. I don't know what's important and I don't know where to go. But then here, if we use consistent button for kind of the give language, whether it's give today or donate, you can see fewer options in the beginning and having a more of a guided journey, and more priority placed on what the giving opportunity is. Thinking as well as footers, making it easy to sign up for email, easy to make a quick donation. You can see here, pre-selected amount, $50 goes to help empower survivors of trafficking. Hey, if you're not on the bandwagon, phones are here to stay. Mobile giving is a very important part of fundraising. And you can see that the percentage of overall traffic is now the majority. Have you updated your website in the last couple of years to making sure that it's a great mobile experience? Have you made sure that your email renders well at night? Again, some best practices here that you can take a look at, but highly, highly recommend if you're working with the team to make sure that it is so easy for you to give with this, with your thumbs. It's just don't make it a difficult experience. Integrated fundraising technically includes brand awareness. And one of my favorite visuals is this one here. Like, we all know those are McDonald's fries. And that, again, the shapes and colors are a big part of brand awareness. But it's more than just the colors, a slogan and a logo. Branding establishes trust. It's design's job to represent you accurately and consistently across all platforms. So another reason to not have a different print versus digital is you want to be making sure that there's an overall arc of consistency. And so making sure that we're, I'll just kind of skip through this a little bit, but like just the campaign process is an opportunity in itself to establish consistency, who you serve, and kind of how you kind of communicate is also part of that brand experience. And here's an example of like a high value donor connector piece where it's saying in more simpler visuals, what does it mean to kind of, participate at a higher level and start to invest in the organization? Similar, we saw earlier is this kind of visual around summer camp, allowing the landing page to also convey the similar language and imagery. And again, print, digital, connecting, same person, same theme, and shown in a different way. Good copy. So the second principle here, it's hard to know why any individual is giving, but what are the main relevant points of why someone gives? We don't want an organizational focus. We don't have time to dive into an example here. But what do we want it to be? We want it to be engaging, empowering, and motivating. And I mentioned before, Copy Optimizer, if you want to kind of Google it, it's the agitator. They have a lot of kind of language that would help you if you're doing your own writing to making sure it's more of a personal letter and it follows a narrative format. So involving is saying, you, but also he, she, they, and the idea of a narrative, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit, is the basic principles of storytelling, and where we're making sure that we're kind of triggering an emotional response, giving an opportunity for someone to act, and connecting people to the cause. And so if we've ever watched a Pixar movie, we're thinking about, what's the conflict, and what's, showing the problem, identify the enemy, and then using the donor as the hero here. And this is a timeless story arc of what happened. And so a lot of good fundraising writing says, when he was, this is the state, then he came here and I met him and then this happened, and will you be part of this solution? So remembering that it's not just a fixed point in time. So takeaway here is no matter how many people are helping, we want to feature individual stories, people helping people. My favorites is good data, but we're not just thinking about donor data. We want to be thinking about consistency, that itself for the calendar is important. The timing, a lot of our organizations have very basic 4 appeals, 2 newsletters, and then start to grow from there. The who, and ideally you're having, your copy be variable to whether they're new, lapse, monthly, frequent. Did they give to a COVID campaign? And now you can specifically reference that. And metrics. It's a surprising thing how many organizations just say, will you give $50 for more of what we do without saying what it is? And ideally you're saying $50 does this for this person, and giving it a more clear metric for how much you give. And as a charity, you have the opportunity to have more than one metric. And why are we doing regular campaigns? They condition donors to give a certain time. And the goal here is that you're the leader of their behavior. This is just a very brief glimpse into how we do donor segmentation. As we use a mathematical model. Most organizations that do fundraising use this frequency, recency, and monetary or amount to kind of grade a donor, and then we assign ask amounts relevant to that donor. Something that you can do is a heat test to say, hey, we can do as a follow-up, but like there's a few different ways you can go about this to find out like where are donors looking. And so we study intently where are donors taking a look on the form. Funny enough, not too often at the letter itself. And so kind of one of the things I wanted to kind of round it up here is really we're looking at good copy, good design, good data for the overall purpose of great results. And Sam, that is my presentation.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. That was very helpful. We actually have a lot of questions coming in. I was just
awesome.
So if you don't mind, we'll jump straight into the questions.
You bet.
The first one actually goes straight back to the beginning. It's from Alex. So for the stats that you mentioned for your clients, just to give us an overview and relatability, how big are the budgets on average that you work with, just for their reference point?
Yeah, so most of our organizations, like so we saw for web revenue, are in the $200,000 to $1 million online revenue. Frontier's worked with all. So one of our organizations, multi-million. So 6 million in online revenue, but there's a few in the kind of 100 to 200,000 in web. As regards print, spend wise, the most would be $500,000 spent on print fundraising and raising a few million in revenue. Most of our clients have like a mailing list in the 10,000 range. But what's fun about Frontier is we've got actually kind of a wide range within that group.
Perfect. I think that will be very helpful just for people referencing those stats in the slides later. So thank you. The next question actually comes from Nam. How would mid-level communication differ from annual or direct mail communication?
Yeah. So, and I use, so like there's, in my mind, 2 forms of acquisition. One is just getting someone to become a donor and giving their first $70 and joining the team. The second acquisition is this mid-level gift. And I think mid-level gifts are the purpose of someone becoming a major donor. So the communication varies because you're trying to pull them away from your annual giving. So if they're used to giving $150 a year, the message is going from that sort of serving a need to trying to show them investment language and be like, hey, we're doing something different and you're special. Would you like to be a part of it? And getting someone to respond, that shouldn't be the fundraising goal of the money raised. It should be, hey, you've now broken from the pack. Can I tell you about even more things? Because I think you might actually be a major donor in waiting.
Nam says investment language, love it, thank you. And I agree, yeah, very helpful. I love the different perspectives. The third question is actually from an anonymous attendee. So why do you think calendar year end is a big donation time?
Well, I think the more important thing is your organization year end is not important. And so understanding that someone with a higher, and this is particularly, I'm not sure kind of US taxation, but in Canada is my last day to give on my tax form is December 31st. I have the best understanding of how much money I earned in 2020 on December 31st. And I can make a most informed decision on how much I'm giving. And remembering that like at 6 p.m. on December 31st, I might be, okay, I made this much. So here's $30,000 online.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, I wish I made $30,000 that I could just give away in.
Oh my, this year, I was watching it all stream in and I was like, man, what a fun experience to give away $50,000 today. I saw from someone. Yeah.
Maybe in 10 years, Sam.
Yeah.
Pat myself on the back.
Yeah, exactly.
The fourth question is also from an anonymous attendee. You mentioned that new donor acquisition is important, but you also shared on a slide that new donor acquisition is costly. So other stats show that lapsed donors are a better method of increasing donations. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, and it sort of depends on like kind of what are we saying for increasing donations. So the response rate for lapsed acquisition we find is very similar to rented list acquisition. And one area that we're still studying is trying to see how their 5-year value differs. We don't in general see a very different second gift conversion from a lapsed donor returning. And so if they weren't generous before, the odds of them being generous afterwards are quite low. But the odds of a new donor having a fresh relationship with you and potentially being a new major donor, like that's when you're thinking of it can be better to acquire a new donor if you viewed both in that investment language. There is probably more opportunity of finding a future middle and major donor through acquisition than through deep lapsed.
And I guess as well, it's database specific too, depending on the organization.
Yeah, and like I love deep lapsed, and again, like it's donors that have already known you, and there might be a change in how you're communicating that you can do that. Hey, we're back and we're different kind of thing.
Perfect. The next question is from Tracy. Do you ever get pushback from donors not wanting a lot of money spent on premiums?
Yes. What the one that we get like the most happiest is when donors get a phone call. Like the broadcast voice message, and yet the phone call is more expensive overall if we're doing it live than the premium. So understanding that there's maybe some misconceptions there. So good stewardship of someone saying like, why did you do this for me? And I think the overall recommendation is that people who answer the phone are empowered to respond with like, hey, you might not know this, but this is actually quite cheap for us. But the response rates outweigh the people that might call and be complained. Mm-hmm. And there's ways to avoid it seeming very expensive. Like some organizations' premiums are like, here's a pen, here's magnets, here's other things that are physically weighty versus maybe a more paper-based, a coloring card, right? Like you're not necessarily spending a lot of money printing out a sheet of a coloring card. Kind of thing.
And I think that goes into the whole conversation about nonprofit overhead as well, and just educating
Mm-hmm.
donors completely.
Yeah, and like one of my beliefs is like inflation taking off, right? Like we think the price of housing, the price of everything going up, right? But one that hasn't really affected us very much is the cost of print and postage. So I think there's this old belief that print and postage are quite expensive, when hiring a team of donor relations is really the thing that is the driver of overhead, right?
Of course. And if you hire a fundraiser at however much per year, but then they help fundraise double that amount, even if you're donating into that fundraiser's salary, you're actually still having quite an impact.
Yeah.
The next question is actually going back to the photography section. So what are some ways that I can find an inexpensive but good photographer? I dropped my own little card in there. I'm a photographer. I take wine as payment. You're welcome. But for those who are not in Vancouver, maybe chatting through some ways to find inexpensive photographers.
Yeah, and even like if you have a volunteer, or if you have someone on your team doing the photography, like even an iPhone takes great videography now. It's more the principles of making sure that you aren't asking someone to rush down into a lineup, and just take a group shot, right? Like it's the like understand. And so what it could be is someone like Sam coaching someone on your team to making sure that they even understand the principles of good photography. So, because it's not about the technology anymore. It's not that you have to have an awesome Canon DSLR, although that's quite nice. It might actually not be the most genuine experience. And even furthermore is like organizations, the programs could be in Africa and we're here on the island. So we need to make sure the person who's there is taking a photograph is doing a good job of it. So kind of to teach them how to do it would be how I'd recommend.
And to be honest, anyone with an iPhone 8 and above, you can take as good of photos on the fly as my DSLR. So that's a pro tip for anyone who does want to learn photography. Go on the internet, learn the rule of thirds, get an iPhone, and you will survive.
Yep.
The third to last question is coming from Alex. So while mobile is up, we have noticed with our members who are 55 plus, they're still primarily using internet on desktops. Is that food for thought?
I'd say so, because you're probably not watching this on a mobile device. When I do my job, I use my iMac. So if we remember that most giving is someone in their peak earning, so that executive isn't exactly, the stock of photography of them on their iPad on the couch kind of thing. They're probably right now at their desk and checking their emails in between meetings. And so, yeah, like the majority of giving very much is a desktop experience, because when we think about our email communication is still very work-based.
True, very true. Kind of spiraling off of that tangent as well, Tracy asks, can you describe what a landing page is versus a website page?
Yeah, well, the landing page is wherever I came from that I'm landing on. So just from a technical, like if I clicked an ad and the first thing I see on your website is the landing page, versus every page on your website. And then realizing that maybe if we made sure that landing page wasn't just the home page, or it wasn't just your general donate page, and so the more particular you could have that page to the reason that someone previously clicked, and understanding that's that journey from clicking to giving, and it's okay for that to be kind of different language and more specified.
So for any of you who are Keela customers, think of your journey through Tequila as well. When you landed on, say, the book a demo page, how did you get there? Did you come from Capterra or software advice? So what you land on from the site that's referring will be a lot different than someone who, say, just came and landed on our landing page. We use language specific based on the channels that we're trying to get to know new nonprofits in and kind of tailor it towards that. And then we follow that ask through to customer. And that's how we stalk you a little bit, but it's fun. So there's another question from an anonymous user. For non-charities or not-for-profits, what kind of differences in marketing or acquisition methods do you see? Where do you start if you don't have donors and never have, and can't entice people with donation receipts?
Yeah, and I think the big effect there is you probably just get less. So if my goal was $70 as a first gift for like a new charitable donor, I'd be thinking less for that kind of the non-charitable, and using different language, right? Chip in, be part of this. So like, why does your gym get $30 a month from you, right? You're providing value. So we're not, not to say that it's, you're missing the charitable value, which is getting the kind of tax deduction, but kind of saying, hey, you're part of a community, join in. This is a movement, like making sure that language is there, and then still having metrics, versus like, well, we need money because we're doing a thing, but it's not recognized. And there's a way that an organization holds itself back by not having clear and concise sort of join language. Right? $5 means you're part of this change happening for this person.
Great, thank you. And then I think, unless more questions trickle in, our last question is from Joanne. It sounds like most of your clients have campaigns with huge budgets. What do you recommend, or is the most important thing? What do you recommend, or is the most important thing to use when we are a very small not-for-profit care home where we have no operational money to commit to this and only funds raised are really needed for specific needs?
Yep. So if you're able to do something like the broadcast voice message, it costs less than 10 cents per phone number for us to do it. And again, so if you're doing something where you have very little time and very little money, so our clients spend hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars, to communicate in that way. If you only have a very small list of people, that means your print budget is extraordinarily cheap, and that you have an opportunity to do things in a more manual way. So do the hard work anyways, is what I would suggest, because you don't have large costs. It does mean you'd be having to find some way to fund acquisition, because the only way you can grow is with new donors. Right? Like it isn't untapped potential within your existing donors. And so doing what you can to build a process, even if it's just an ad campaign that you only put a little bit of money into, to growing an email list. But yeah, so I mean, most of our clients, like what our Victoria client, his total revenue is 500,000 now, but we started with nothing in 2011.
Wow. Sorry, I was taken aback by it. Yeah, no, that's amazing.
I don't think,
So we did have another question trickle in from an anonymous user. So as an extremely small organization, actually in Africa with zero budget and zero fundraising history, how can we acquire new donors with a very subpar digital presence? We're working on social media and cold emailing, but we're looking to grow the network.
I'm not a huge fan of social media. If you're referring to it as for direct fundraising opportunity, so social networking has been around forever. If you think of networking, should be about making friends and being part of someone else's community, not showing up and taking their money. So just if you're kind of focusing your efforts, if we go back to that phrase, concentration builds wealth, right? So don't do a whole bunch of things, right? Other organizations that are making money, I want them to try and do other things, even if they have marginal results. So I would say choosing your method of fundraising and being very particular about it. Again, like I said, it could be just having the online ad, or just being very good at writing those emails and do it a ton. If people don't want to join, get them to unsubscribe. You want a small loyal base that you're building on.
Sometimes it is quality versus quantity.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think those are all of the questions. So I believe that concludes our session for today.